Welcome to day 6 of our tea extravaganza. We're on the downhill slope, which if you're growing tired of my jibber jabber, it's good news. I'm going to be quiet soon. Today is going to be a little bit different than other days. Up to now we have kind of separated our lesson into heaven and earth. By heaven, I don't mean paradise. I mean more like sky, philosophy, ungrounded language, ungrounded concepts. And earth, which is the practical stuff, the practical aspect of how to prepare tea and how to conduct a tea ceremony. But today is a little different. We're not going to have this separation. We're just going to It's going to be all one lesson and all mixed up. Why? Well, because today's lesson is about tea itself. Today we're going to talk the whole time about tea, and tea very much is heaven and earth. It's all of these things, just as we are, right? Though this course has been, kind of very balanced in the two, actually in the life of a human being, it's better to be a little bit heavier on the earth side. We have a slogan in Zen, right? Which is gaze at the stars, but walk on the earth. So it's okay to stargaze, but we gotta do the laundry. So I hope that at the end of this course, you're not left feeling like it was too ungrounded, and that there was at least a good balance. But in life, I think in actual living, we need a little bit more this way. So today's just going to be one big lesson all about tea herself. And we're going to learn about tea from several angles. Starting with a brief kind of introduction in history, I guess, and prehistory, because tea extends well beyond the brush of history. And I think it's first important to mention, especially for those who are beginners, and we're all trying to be beginners, right? Beginner's mind. That as we talk about tea, we're not talking about tea in the very loose way that the word tea is sometimes used in the West. Sometimes that word tea is used to discuss any plant in hot water, right? Like chamomile tea or blueberry rooibos pumpernickel tea. Right? When I talk about tea for the remainder of this 2 hours and throughout this whole 7-day course, I'm talking about a very specific cluster of plants. It's often assumed that it's actually one plant, which is Camellia sinensis, but it's not. It's often promulgated that all tea is Camellia sinensis. That's not true. There are several species of camellia that are used to make tea. In fact, Taiwan has its own camellia species, Camellia formosensis, that is native here, and it is a completely different species, which means that they don't reproduce naturally. Technically they could, but they won't do so naturally. The way that you technically could make a tiger and a lion breed and make a liger, but in nature, lions and tigers won't reproduce. So separate species. So there are a co-cluster of camellia species used to make tea. The primary one, most certainly, is Camellia sinensis. It represents high 90% of all tea in the world. So, and the beginnings of it, in terms of a more linear approach, it's well beyond history. It's really hard to know. For at least 20 years of my writing career, I've even taken some flack for saying nope, much older, and having some tea scholars be like meh, and then sure enough, discoveries, and I'm vindicated a little bit. I don't know how old, none of us do. The upward potential without any evidence, just circumstantial evidence, the upward potential for human tea consumption is literally 500 to 600,000 years. And that is because at that time, there actually were many species of hominid on this planet, something that many people don't know. And one of those was called Homo erectus, because they walked upright. As you can probably guess, based on our issues that are, manifest just as much nowadays as they were then, there was some interbreeding with these other species of hominids, but for the most part, we killed them. That's really, for the most part, what happened. In terms of Homo erectus, they had language, they had culture, they had fire. To what extent they are related to us? Are they cousins? Are they our ancestors? We don't know. There's different theories, and it's hard to say. But there was a type of Homo erectus called Yuanmo that inhabited, starting around 500, 600,000 years ago, and then for hundreds of thousands of years, inhabited the forest where tea comes from. Tea comes from the bottom of the Himalayas. It was birthed in what is today Yunnan, which means south of the clouds. It's a province in China, and parts of Myanmar, Laos, Vietnam, India. That whole area is a birthplace of tea. My heart tells me there's an area called the Five Mountains in Linchang, and there is some biological evidence, but my heart also, from going to that place, tells me that is the birthplace of tea. And there is some genetic corroboration to that, but not proven. But anyway, that forest was inhabited by these hominids, and potentially they used tea. We don't know. If you need hard evidence, you're that type of person. Again, as I said, even a couple decades ago, the line was drawn at like 2,000 years or a little bit more, but now we know at least 6,000, which is the Neolithic period in Chinese. The Chinese Neolithic period lasts longer than the European one, and that evidence comes from a place called Tianluoshan. They have found, first of all, some pottery that potentially is teaware, some shards of pottery that have pictures of tea trees on it, and then you can't get more hard than this, you can't get more conclusive than this. They've actually found what are called rhizomes, which are petrified roots of tea trees. So the actual plant. And that's in Zhejiang province, so it's actually quite far from the origin of tea. So already 6,000 years ago, potentially it was very far away from where it comes from. It had already spread that far. So the history of it is ancient. Ancient, deep, powerful, and really hard to pinpoint if that's important to you. It's not really important to me. I just like to question anytime somebody's like, it's this old. And I'm like, who knows, right? That I don't know mine. I'm open. And ancient is what my blood tells me. And you have to wonder, like, did we notice tea, or did tea notice us? It's a really valid question, actually. I'm using a little bit of mythopoetic language, but even from a scientific, literal perspective, that's real. The language of like notice obviously isn't. That's a little bit of an anthropomorphization of the tea tree. But plants do, for example, this is how they propagate themselves, the birds and the bees, right? They create fruit that is sweet and colorful and attracts animals to come and eat that fruit and carry their seeds so that they can reproduce. or flowers to attract bees, etc. And tea does that. Tea is a sexual plant. So it actually has a male and a female and needs to be cross-pollinated. And in nature, tea reproduced mostly with the help of mice and owls. Because tea seeds don't germinate very well. And so what would happen is mice would collect the seeds, which are very protein dense, and build caches of them in a hole for later. And then owls would come and eat some of the mice, and the mice that got eaten wouldn't return to their cache. And like this is one of the, more predominant. I don't know what percent. It doesn't matter. It's just one of the ways that it was propagated. But then along came these two-legged beings, and maybe tea was like, right? These two-legged beings might be much better propagators of us if we could only get them to eat us. If we could only do that. It's hard to say, really, how that, it's really, for me, more of a relationship. And you can look at it from a scientific, biological level of like tea gives something to us and we give something to her. We propagate her and actually trim her also. Even wild tea trees thrive much better when humans come around. Tea likes to be plucked. So we help her thrive, and we also propagate her far better than owls and mice. And what we get, obviously, is a lot of medicine. You could also take a much more romantic approach and just say we were star-born lovers waiting to meet. And love at first sight, humans and tea. Really, any approach you want to take to that. To me, if you want to take then an even more spiritual approach, one of the origin myths of tea comes from this character Shennong. And Shennong means divine farmer. He was this emperor, supposedly ruled for 1,000 years in ancient times. And he, he's kind of half man, half animal. He's like a lot of these deities that often, because they were pagan, Christians interpreted him as the devil, which is why the devil is often depicted as horns. But the real reason that these beings were depicted with, like, Shennong often has clothes made of leaves and he has horns. The horns aren't meant to be satanic. The horns are meant to be like he's part nature. And, he's called the divine farmer because he gave agriculture to people. He gave civilization. He's also the father of Chinese medicine, which is amongst the earliest, if not the earliest medicine on earth. So maybe the father of medicine, full stop, you could just say. And, what he really represents, what he's a metaphor of is all the collective wisdom of the tribal chieftains and shamans of pre-civilized China. Because that wisdom of the tribal chieftains and shamans of pre-civilized China is what gave civilization, right? So he represents that part man, part animal time. And the story is, anyway, he was meditating in the forest and the tea leaf fell into his boiling water and he drank it and said, "This is the empress of all medicinal herbs." These words we have in our center, right? This is the empress of all medicinal herbs. Is a powerful statement for the father of medicinal herbs to say that, right? But the falling of the leaf into the water suggests what I was saying earlier. It's kind of like tea reaching out to us. It's a telephone call from the plant kingdom to us. It's not like meant to be a coincidence. In fact, I sometimes used to send friends cards and I would draw that leaf falling into there and the leaf had a little bubble, a comic, and was saying, "We." It's like almost like the leaves elected one of them. Like, "Yes, you're going to be the one to go. Okay, we." And then Shennong is very sensitive, so he, of course, recognized that. I think to me what this is suggesting is that this plant is the avatar of love. It is a chemical / genetic message from Mother Earth that saying to humans, "I see you, my children. May this medicine bring you in harmony with the mountain, with the season, with all my plant children and animal children, etc." I see it very much as an avatar of love, literally, yeah, made to be human. Like we have receptors for it. It was chemically programmed to fit in and to find us and to be the plant kingdom's voice to us, to restore our deep connection with nature that we already are. And so I feel the love in it, in tea, from the plant kingdom. And also with that love, the warning, because Mother loves you, she'll warn you when you're going astray. So that's a lot of how I regard that initial leap into human, is that it's from the plant kingdom to us, which is very important because there's a lot of other plant medicines that are, becoming much more predominant in use nowadays. And I feel like a lot of those, call them entheogens or active substances, they are medicine, but they're more of a journey from human world to the plant world. And because of that, you go there and the plants there don't so much care about you in the same way. They're a little bit more alien. And the lessons you get there are a little bit more alien, so they're a little bit harder to integrate into the daily life of a human being. But since this plant teacher is from the plant kingdom to us, it integrates into a human life perfectly. All the tea lessons are life lessons, and they integrate immediately. There's no digestion period. And she loves us. She's gentle. If you're drinking tea and something dark happens, it's like a mother who took her daughter or son to the movie theater, and the movie gets a little scary. Even if the mother's enjoying the film, if the child says, "Can we go?" the mother says, "Of course." So if you're having something unpleasant happen, you just ask her, and she'll be like, "Okay, honey." She's very gentle and soft and wonderful. So I think this is one of the beautiful things of it, is that it's from the plant kingdom to us. It's a gift to us. It's not the only plant like this. I think corn is like this, for example. But it's a beautiful, beautiful medicine in that way. And then, in this modern, we've talked about this, in this modern, like, thought-based, very hyper-rational world where the average person can't, I keep saying this, they can't truly see, let alone understand why someone would want to live with spirit in their everyday life. I have often, when I teach in public, felt compelled, ultimately the compulsion is from me, but I've felt compelled to take an apologetic tone for my spiritual relationship to tea. Now, I know that's my own hang-up. It's partly just that I want to reach more people, I want to help more people, I want to meet them where they are, as opposed to being like, I'm cool, I'm spiritual, or something like that, But that apologetic tone, that's just one of the ways that this modern world, also can be a little bit grating. And the thing is, even if all the spiritual stuff in tea was stuff that I just added because I'm a spiritual person, I think that's fine. I'm not asking everybody to drink that tea that way. If it's a beverage to you, fine. I can hang out with you. I drink it as a beverage sometimes too. Is it a hobby? I can hang out with you. It's a hobby to me too. I'm a super tea geek, amongst the biggest geeks there ever lived. So I'm not asking others to drink tea the way that I drink tea, so let me drink tea the way that I want to drink tea. I'm not asking you to do the same. And I don't think it's cool. However, there's a whole other side to this. Which is the very real truth that, you could say, live and let live. I'm a spiritual person, so I want to drink tea in a spiritual way. I'm a traditionalist, so I want to drink tea in a ceremonial way. You don't have to do that. I have no condescension if you don't. Let me drink tea the way I want to. You drink tea the way you want to. You approach tea the way you want. I'll approach tea the way I want. That is a valid response to those that wonder, like, why all the spirituality in tea. However, it isn't something I've made up. You scratch the surface, and there's thousands of years of a religious/spiritual approach to tea. Tea is quintessential to all 4 of the religions of China. Notice I said 4, because Sinophiles and other Chinese historians make the mistake that historians make all over the world, which is to abrogate the indigenous perspective and say China has 3 great religions. China has indigenous people. China has shamans. China has indigenous heritage, tribal heritage. And to those people, they're the birth of tea. The tribes of that area of Yunnan, they're the founders of tea. It's their culture that carried it long before it ever reached Han people, which are Chinese people. Tea didn't start as a Chinese anything. It started as a tribal plant medicine for a people whose ancestors we don't have a great name for. We call them Sino-Tibetans, because they're kind of a blend of Southeast Asian people and Tibetan people, and not related to Han Chinese. So to them, you've got plant medicine. To the Taoists, it was alchemy and a way to connect to nature. To the Buddhists, it was one of the 5 essential mindfulness techniques. Way of meditating, right? Along with seated meditation and walking meditation, sitting in power spots in nature. And believe it or not, one of the traditional ways of meditating, which is funny because I used to do it all the time when I was a kid. I grew up with water behind my house, a big pond. And anytime I was troubled, I would go there and feed the fish. Actually, feeding fish is a mindfulness technique in traditional Chinese Buddhism. So to them, it was mindfulness and meditation and also ceremony. To bring community together, etc. In fact, the mainstream of China was introduced to tea through through monasteries, not just Zen, but Buddhist monasteries introduced tea to the mainstream, to the literati and scholars, and then from them it trickled down to the whole of the public. So, and that happened mostly in the Tang Dynasty, which is 618 to 907. So it's through Buddhism that China really got tea, that the mainstream got tea. And to the Confucians, tea was a lot of the things we talked about on day 3, that ceremony, that li, that if you do the ceremony, then the qualities can also infuse in you, even unconsciously. So it's been a part of the spiritual and religious heritage of China and for thousands of years. Deep and powerful, and you can throw a stone and find a million spiritual religious poems and ceremonies and methods and approaches and et cetera, et cetera. So these lineages are deep and powerful. In fact, one of the big things that began my tea journey, it was a question. It's always questions. We move with questions. No doubt, no awakening. Little doubt, little awakening. Great doubt, great awakening. Questions are not answers, right? In Zen, we have a beautiful saying, right? It's much better to have a question that can't be answered than an answer that can't be questioned. You can put that one in the bank. Question everything. And so one of the questions that really inspired me early on, drove me early on even, was a lot of tea books, both Chinese and English. They would jump over thousands of years of Chinese history and prehistory, thousands of years of tea history and prehistory in a single sentence. How many thousands of years? Again, we don't know. Upward potential, 500, 600,000, at least 6,000. So they would jump over 4,000 years or 5,000 years or 500,000 years. They would jump over thousands of years in a single sentence, which was something to the effect of, for thousands of years, tea was medicine to Chinese people. And then, floop, we're at modern times and it's a beverage and a commodity. And I always was like, wait a minute, right? I've spent the last 30 years of my life unpacking that sentence and writing books about it. And I couldn't exhaust it with 10 more lifetimes. When someone says to you, Tea was medicine to Chinese people for thousands of years. You're like, what? Thousands of years? That's a lot of time. That's a lot of culture. There's a lot of depth in that. And medicine? What do you mean medicine? Medicine for what? What does that mean even? There's so much richness in that, in the plant medicine of it. And we don't have the time to unpack that. That could be a whole course in itself. I recommend a start. You could read my book, Tea Medicine. It's kind of what it's all about. Is that unpacking that question, right? One clue to start diving into that, I'll give you some more today, but one kind of clue to start diving into that is to understand that, plant medicine requires participation. That's the first. I'll give you two little ways to start unpacking this. That's the first one. Plant medicine requires participation. If you're looking for a chemical substance to do something to your body objectively, whether you want it to or not, you should choose allopathic medicine. It is obviously far superior at doing that. In fact, even when chemicals in plants have an objective effect on the chemistry of a human being, allopathic medicine will be much better at exploring that possibility scientifically, extracting that chemical, creating it, distributing it, etc. Right? And healing modalities are not exclusive. We don't need to choose one for the rest of our life. They can all play a role in how we heal ourselves. They don't need to combat. They can be friends. And they have things to offer each other, right? And this is why almost every plant medicine, at least in the United States, that you pick up off the shelf in the supermarket, if you turn it over, it says literally on there, like the FDA has found this does nothing. Basically, when you put this to scientific scrutiny, it doesn't respond. And if your primary approach is the allopathic method, then that's kind of, that means that capsule is probably not useful for you. But I think plant medicine really requires a bit of participation. In other words, you got to interact with the plants. You got to show up. And common sense demonstrates that this is real and true, right? You just need to ask yourself, have you ever tried a store-bought, conventionally grown industrial tomato? And have you ever then tried an organic tomato grown in someone's garden who loves growing tomatoes? Are they different? Very different in flavor, in aroma, in the way they feel in your body, right? And I would argue that that would be true even if they both came from the same seeds, from the same genetic lineage. Even if they were grown right next door to each other and as close as possible of soil, they would still be very different. Why? Because of the human intention and the human care that went into allowing those beings to grow in that way. So in the same way, right? Like how the plant is grown, how it's harvested, how it's handled, how it's treated. This is what I mean by participation. And traditionally, Chinese herbs were boiled. As traditional Chinese medicine has had to compete with Western medicine, it's tried to become more like allopathic medicine. Chinese doctors trying to wear white coats and give people capsules. But traditionally, the herbs were all boiled for the most part. And, some people, maybe even Chinese doctors, have forgotten that the time of when the herbs were boiling, part of the prescription was often for the patient to meditate or pray while the herbs were boiling, and sometimes even have a mantra or some kind of spell. Sometimes literally sacred words were written on paper and dissolved into the medicinal brew, or amulets were put in while it was boiling. A huge percentage of old Chinese medicine texts is, like all traditional medicines, devoted to amulets and all kinds of this kind of thing, which you can, from the one perspective, from a rational perspective, you can just dismiss it as superstition and foo-foo. I understand that perspective. But even with the rational perspective, there is a door into this. Because every allopathic doctor on earth will tell you something that is absolutely proven, which is that placebos work. You can prescribe sugar pills and heal people. The power of the mind is incredibly powerful. Strong. Every doctor knows that placebos are effective. So if you are very rational and you don't like the whole like amulets and all that kind of stuff in healing, you could at least view this. A doorway to start viewing this is to see that at least those amulets and those prayers and those meditations are causing the human to believe in the medicine, and that mental power of orienting towards healing, it is incredibly powerful and incredibly effective. So you could say these are, I guess, if from this perspective, to use a little bit more negative language, they're like tricks that get the mind and the spirit on board for the healing process and get it involved, get it believing, and then it's helpful to an extent. That's a doorway into this. But, plant medicine, I just think, requires participation. That's kind of one way that you can start to unpack the medicine of tea. I think a second aspect or a second way that you can start to let it in is to open up your understanding of what health is. In the modern world, because of the thought-based, very rational worldview that most of us inhabit, we tend to just unconsciously assume that human health is the absence of disease. But the absence of physical disease is not really the definition of what it means to be human optimally. It's not health, we have mental health, we have spiritual health, we have, and they're not even separate. We like that separation, body for the doctor, spirit for the temple or the church, and mind for the psychologist. But they're all one system, at least while we're incarnated. And, just like when your body's sick, it's not like you're in perfect Buddhic peace and it only affects your body. When you have a cold, your mind and spirit are disrupted too. And it goes the other way. People who have very traumatic experiences often then have physical diseases. That's very common. So health isn't just the absence of disease. And none of us are ever going to be absent of disease. And that perspective also makes death an enemy, which is a very curious attitude for someone who has to die. It's also a very curious attitude for someone whose very life every day is dependent upon the death of other beings. If you're anti-death, if you're against death, you're against your own life. You're going to starve to death because you have to eat and beings have to die for you to eat. And so it's a very curious perspective to take that. I think a much better poetry is Rumi. Rumi said very poetically, right? Your relationship to death is your relationship to God. The friend of God is a friend of death. The enemy of God is the enemy of death. That's a poetry. It doesn't mean like, if you're a friend of God, you go committing suicide. It just means that death is a part of life. It's very natural. That doesn't mean we shouldn't invest energy in avoiding it or trying to live. Right? It just means that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes the aggressive approach of like disease and death or enemy is not itself, that approach is not healthy. In other words, the question is there a healthy way to die? Or is all death unhealthy by definition? Is there a healthy way to get sick, etc.? So, health isn't just absence of disease. Health isn't just some chemical state. It's more complicated than that. And when you allow that in, you understand a little bit more of plant medicine. And then we get in the history of tea to the commoditization. The commoditization, is like the commoditization and recreationalization of almost all sacred plants on earth. The American example is tobacco. And, it's a perspective, that thought-based perspective, it doesn't jive with the traditional perspective. When the Europeans first came to the Americas, the Native Americans were constitutionally, in their worldview, they were incapable of understanding the ownership of land. If you buy a piece of land, the frogs don't care about that imaginary boundary. The trees don't. If your property has a lake on it, like mine did in the backyard, and the sun dapples on that lake every morning, do you own that dapple? It would be akin to if somebody knocked on your door tomorrow, and he's fully legit. Let's say you're not getting this is not a scam artist. It's a fully legit man. He's got a briefcase, and he knocks on your door and he says, "Excuse me, madam. Excuse me, sir. I'm interested in purchasing from you today 5 stars. My company would like ownership of those 5 stars, and we're willing to pay you $1,000 a star. Here's the contract. I have the money, the check right here. Now, you have 2 choices. You can say to this fellow, you can be honest. You can say to him, look, sir, I don't own the stars. Nobody owns the stars. You can't own the stars. I'm sorry. I can't help you. Or you can take the approach of a fool and his money are soon parted and say, yes, $5,000. I'd love $5,000. I'll buy some hi-fi equipment. And then, so you sign and take the money. And this is very much, how Native Americans, for the most part, reacted in one of these 2 ways when people wanted to come buy land, right? So the commoditization of natural things, this is a leaf, right? In the true absolute sense, doesn't make any sense. You can't own it. It's not stuff. It's a living being. It's energy. It's made of sun and minerals and wind and water. You can't own it, buy it, sell it. What you're really paying for is those who picked it and transported it to you to make a living. And because you understand this absolute truth, doesn't mean you should go live naked in the woods, or that you should ignore the relative truth of our thought-based reality that we also live in the modern world. From a legal perspective, ownership of property does matter. You can't take this approach and expect to get anywhere. That's like that funny scene in the movie Blow with Johnny Depp, where he gets arrested for smuggling a bunch of marijuana across the Mexico-United States border, and he says to the judge, Judge, look, what did I really do? I took a natural plant that grows on Earth, and I carried it across an imaginary line. And that's absolutely true. But on the other perspective, the judge looks at him and is like, no, you carried an illegal substance across the border between Mexico and the United States, and that is against the law. You're going to prison, right? So you can't ignore the truth of this. This is true on a relative level. It's just not absolutely true. And that commoditization of the earth is really damaging to the planet and the ecology and to our psychology. And I think part of what tea heals is that. It heals us back to that place where we're in alignment with the nature, with that, we have more respect for nature and that which is natural in us. We've been talking about this throughout this course. And, that's why the first thing that I really want to talk to you about when it comes to tea, I'm going to give you a few maps for approaching tea today. And the first one, the most important thing, the absolutely most important thing is the environmental impact of the production of the tea. For us who are practicing tea as plant medicine, if it's not medicine, then it's almost useless. I told you the other day, yesterday, I think, that even in my 20-30 years of drinking tea, the power, the spiritual potency, the medicinal potency of the tea has decreased. And so we kind of have to meet it more. We have to show up with more cultivation, more of our own work, meditation, prayer, all those things we talked about, and tea will meet us. Whereas in the olden days, you have these stories of like this dude, and he's about to die, and he drinks a bowl of tea, and boom, he's healed, or like enlightened, or, you know. I think it is because tea was a lot stronger, and I've had a lot of those very strong teas, and I've noticed this decrease in the strength even in my life. So, you know, for those of us practicing tea this way, like this is so essential. But I would like to say that this is a fundamental issue for every tea lover of any kind anywhere in the world, no matter how you approach tea. If tea is a beverage to you, if tea is a hobby to you, first of all, if tea is a beverage or a hobby to you, I have to say, my brother or my sister, I have to really heartfelt bow to your patience. Because if that's your approach to tea, and you've put up with so many hours of my nonsense and jibber jabber to get to this point right now where we're talking, man, you're a patient brother or sister, and I love you so much. Yeah, because you've just put up with a lot of stuff that makes no sense and is and I see your perspective, I do, and I see how I'm just full of hot air. All these words are hot air, so I very much commemorate you. But no matter how you're approaching tea, its environmental impact is absolutely essential. If it's a beverage, you want a healthy beverage. If it's a medicine, of course we want a healthy medicine. If it's saying in Chinese, right, "Du bu nan jie du," you can't flush poison with poison. So, and if you want a beverage, it's great. Tea should be a healthy beverage, good for you, good for the earth, good for the farmers, good for the people who drink it. And if it's a hobby to you, same, right? If it's a beverage or a hobby, then it's very much a luxury. Medicine is not so much a luxury. And the fact that Chinese tea was medicine to Chinese people for thousands of years is, evidenced by the fact that it was one of the 7 essentials. It was a right of humans to have tea, amongst other things like salt and rice and firewood, etc. It was an essential. If it's medicine, it is an essential. If it's a beverage or a hobby, then it's a luxury. And let me tell you, if it's a luxury, right? If there ever was a time on this earth, if there ever was a time, I don't know, but if there ever was a time when we could afford luxuries that came at the expense of the environment, this ain't it. If you're practicing peace in your life, how can you do that when the instrument of your practice is produced in a way that is violent to nature and to other humans? Then these tea wares aren't instruments of peace, they're instruments of violence. And if you think it's only nature that is damaged by agrochemicals, you're wrong. The World Health Organization estimates thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of humans are died from pesticide exposure every year. Farmers are very much impacted. They have all kinds of miscarriages. They have health problems, and they have also deaths. One of the greatest advocates for organic tea in Taiwan is one of the greatest advocates of organic tea in Taiwan because his father died of pesticide exposure, and both of his brothers have cancer. The only reason he doesn't is because he's the youngest and he didn't work when they started using those agrochemicals. And those stories are common actually in almost every tea growing region. So farmers' lives are impacted by the chemicals just as the earth is impacted, and just as the consumer of them is also impacted. And so what I would say to you, no matter what your approach to tea is, the common ground we all have is that we should be more active in environmental awareness. And it is the consumer. I've asked so many farmers around the world. I've been to every tea growing mountain in China, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan, and many other places. I've asked them all, what can we do? And they all answer the same. You don't have to do anything with us. You educate the consumers. When there's a demand for organic tea, the more that demand grows, the more farmers will do it. They know they'd rather do it that way anyway. It's just a little bit harder work. But if they're supported financially, they will do it. And if there's absolute demand, they'll have to do it. So it requires us consumers to take a stance. You can't accept vendors and they're, blah, 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 because they just, the moment you say, is it organic, they start saying, and spiels. Spiels start happening. Spiels for why it's not. And so this stance is really, it's kind of essential. It's the most important thing I can tell you in your journey of tea. If it's to be medicine, then it must be clean. And even if the other ways of approaching tea, why would you want your pastime to harm people and harm nature? It really doesn't make sense. The question really boils down to this. If you love tea, no matter why you love tea, as a beverage, as a hobby, as a plant medicine, no matter why you love tea, if you love tea, you're saying you love a leaf. How do you love a leaf without loving the forest? Here is something to tattoo on your heart. An essential understanding for every tea lover. The leaf is the tree's expression of its relationship to its environment. The leaf is the tree's expression of its relationship to its environment. Leaves do not arise ex nihilo. They don't come through extra-dimensional portals. A plant gets the energy to create leaves from its environment. It takes in minerals, it takes in water, it takes in sun, and it creates leaves. So what it takes in is what it puts out. And part of what it takes in, just like that conventional tomato and that tomato grown in a garden by someone who loves growing tomatoes, part of what it takes in is the care of the humans that are in relationship to it. How they treat it. That's part of the reason that the medicinal quality of tea has gone down. Just like yesterday I talked about the reason the quality of teapots has gone down is because more teapot makers are making art instead of teapots. More and more farmers are making commodity. They are making beverage. They are making hobby. They aren't making medicine anymore. That intention isn't there as much. For those of us that are seeking more medicinal tea, we like to, the teas that we like to use the most are what we call living tea. This is a translation of Chinese zhen cha. Zhen means, it has the character for upright in it. It means kind of real, but it doesn't translate well because real in English often means like authentic as opposed to fake. And that's not the meaning, so I've translated it as living tea. Living tea has 6 characteristics. The first is that it is seed propagated. Tea is a sexual plant. There's a lot of juju in the coming together of those seeds, and it means that just like humans, the child will look like its parents because it grew up in a similar place and comes from a similar genetic heritage, but it will be unique. Every tree will be unique. And that mutation is a part of the juju of tea. The seed-propagated tea trees live longer. There are 2 types of tea trees, big leaf and small leaf. The original tea trees from its birthplace are big leaf. They have a single trunk and roots that grow downward. And they grow taller. As tea moved north, whether naturally or carried by human beings, it evolved more into a bush with several trunks and roots that grow out and smaller leaves. The leaves get smaller the further north you go. Until you get to Japan, they're so small they're like needles when they're rolled. So that's a small leaf. You can't look at any one leaf and tell because the big trees have also little leaves and the small leaves also have bigger leaves. You have to look at the fully mature leaves. The fully mature leaves of big leaf tea trees are very big. They can be even very, very big. And small leaf tea trees have different sizes depending where they grow. Big leaf tea trees can live thousands of years. The oldest one we've discovered so far is 3,500 years old. It's about 6 people around. I kissed it once for me and once for you. So you got to kiss in too. And recently biologists have found that that tree is the mother of more than 10,000 trees in a huge radius, which is amazing. Small leaf tea trees can live up to around 1,000 years, 800 years. Most tea plantations are made from cuttings, which are clones essentially. It's basically like taking branch and putting it in the ground. So that, that those don't live so long. They can live up maybe 100 years, but typically they actually only live about 15, 20 years, and that's because as soon as their yield drops, they're killed and replaced. Because again, the farmer is approaching this as a commodity, he's not relating to the beings that are in his care, he's viewing it as stuff. So the other big problem between cutting and seed is that there are many others, but briefly I also want to mention is the root structure. So the genetic programming in a branch is to branch. So when you take a cutting and put it in the ground, it just makes branch roots. That's all it knows how to do. Whereas a seed makes a taproot first and then branch roots. So when you seed propagate, you have a taproot that goes deep and is strong and gets deeper nutrients from the mountain, and then you have branch roots. So seed propagation is very important. Second is room to grow. Tea needs room to be healthy, both between plants and upward, right? So, the Japanese, when they controlled Taiwan up until World War II, from the late 19th century to World War II, they built red tea plantations in central Taiwan near Samud Lake, and then those gardens were abandoned for decades. After of course, they planted all the tea in nice, neat rows, all bunched up the way you think of things when you think of man-made plantations. And then you come back decades later. Do you think those trees are still in nice, neat rows? No, they've organized themselves, for lack of a better word. They know that the soil over here is more nutrient dense, there can be more of them clustered together. Over here it's not, there needs more space. They know that because they'll die, basically. If it's, you see, nature spreads them out. They need room. You couldn't be healthy if you lived in a small house with 100 people. You'd be dirty and messy. Beings need space. And that goes for upward too. There is a ratio, biologists know it's there, but it's not measurable because it's different for every single plant, but there's a ratio between the roots and the crown. So when you pollard a tree, which means cut it, they do that so that it branches more and creates more leaves. But when you pollard it, you also shrink the roots. So allowing teas to grow up makes it more inconvenient to pick them because you have to climb, but it also means deeper roots into the mountain, deeper nutrients, etc. So that's the second one, is room to grow. The third aspect of living tea is biodiversity. Biodiversity is incredibly powerful. One of the most influential humans on this planet and in my life is a Japanese brother who's passed away named Fukuoka. He should be canonized. Really should be a saint. What an amazing human. Go read about him, go read his work. And he's very much a very influential factor in the whole organic movement worldwide. And he studied biology in college. And he had a saying that I like a lot. He often said that when he was in college, he had a professor that always used to say that religion and philosophy have no place in the world of science. And then one day, decades later, he was walking in a field of commercially grown barley, and he realized that science has no place in the world of barley. Our thought-based, mind-made world has no place in the world of barley, which is connected to everything. We think we can control and make nature be what our mind wants to map it to be. But that's incredibly dangerous, that monoculture, because of the interrelationship of things. Right? When you drive away insects, you drive away the things that eat insects. When you drive, then the things that eat those things, and all of their poop, which becomes the soil. And what does snake poop have to do with tea trees? And all of these delicate balances and webs are all powerfully created. The best living tea, if we go to Yunnan and we go for a hike, we get to a tea garden after a couple hours, and I say, here we are, here's the tea garden. And you turn to me and say, where? This stretch of forest looks the same as all the stretch of forest that we've been passing through. Yes, biodiversity plays a huge role in the health of any plant. Then no irrigation. Irrigation forces the plant to become dependent on external water and not dig the roots down to get the water from the mountain. The leaf is the tree's expression of its relationship to its environment. Of course, the next one is, number 5, is no agrochemicals. Right? When you bring fertilizer, you are essentially, it's like a hospital patient on an IV. You're essentially feeding tea with nutrients from another environment. It's not eating its environment. And you take away those nutrients, chemical or natural, and it dies. So it's not strong, it's not surviving, it's not absorbing the medicine of nature and giving it to humans. It's streamlining chemicals that it's giving to us, do you see? Like the irrigation. And then the pesticides, I already said, you drive away bugs, you drive away everything, and you might look, some humans might look at a tea plantation with rows of green on a mountain and say, oh, it's so pretty. If you use that thought-based way of looking. But that's not pretty, that's a mountain that's been deforested and species extinct and driven away. And that shouldn't be the way that we grow our medicine, certainly. And it shouldn't be the way that we grow our luxuries either, nor our food. It's an unhealthy way to feed ourselves. I think that's pretty obvious. And finally, living tea, I told you, it's about the intention of the farmer. At least the farmer should be trying, their primary desire should be to make high quality tea. At least. Even on the level of beverage and hobby. They should be striving to make the best quality tea they can, not to make the largest amount and make it as a commoditized quantity. Demanding of nature, hey, you, give me 50 kilos. If you don't, I'll rip you out and put in some other tree or some chemicals. But rather, I'm grateful for whatever you give me. I'm going to strive to make the best quality tea I can, at best. Even better, they're striving to make medicine. Making the shift from beverage to plant medicine and from tea drinking to tea ceremony, if you can make those two psychological shifts throughout this course, you get an A+. I feel like I've succeeded. Those are very much the fulcrum that makes this practice change your life. Beverage to ceremony, beverage to plant medicine, drinking to ceremony. Yeah. So choose living tea. Not all tea can be living tea though. We need some plantation tea, we need some compromise. If you don't like compromise, you shouldn't have incarnated in 2020. What can I say? We got some compromise. But at least if we're gonna have plantation tea, it should be sustainable. It should not harm nature. It should not harm the farmers who grow it, and it should not harm our bodies. So at least it should be free of agrochemicals, at least, minimum. We support that tea too, right? All of the teas that we have in our center, all of the teas we have are either organic plantation tea or living tea. We try to seek out living tea as much as possible, because that's where the medicine and the juju is much more strong, and you don't got to meet it. You got to meet this tea a lot more, I guess. So that environmental map is the most important map for navigating the tea world. Question number 1 always, is it clean? I made a commitment decades ago that I will not support unsustainable tea. Doesn't mean I judge anyone. The farmers are the first victims. They're around those chemicals in concentrations you and I aren't. And if farmers were more respected, it's difficult for us to demand that farmers do something, right, when we don't respect them financially or even respect them. Centuries of feudalism has made farming a low-class job in the eyes of a lot of people, when actually all jobs are dependent on farming. It's the highest job. If we respected farmers more, if we honored them financially, right, then it would be easier to have these dialogues. But I made that commitment, and that means I can't drink some teas that I love. But I always have lots of tea around me. No scarcity of tea, but certain types of tea, probably the saddest thing in my whole tea journey. I have literally shed countless tears, and I could cry right now. The saddest thing One of them anyway. Really, like top 5 saddest aspects. Another of the top 5 saddest aspects we already went over is how my ancestors in my tea lineage could geek out on water. Snow from a plum tree, rivers, streams, and I can't do that because of what the pollution we've done to the earth. That's very sad to me. I hope future tea lovers are able to explore the relationship with water and tea to a much greater degree than we can. So that's amongst the woundings of my heart, because this is all, waking up comes with it's not all peaches and roses. It comes with a lot of pain. You wake up and you're going to realize that we have unconsciously wounded nature, and we have unconsciously wounded that which is natural in us. And there's a spiritual fine levied for that, actually. And so, another of the sadnesses, though, is amongst the 5 greatest teas on this planet, there's a tea called Dragon Well, Longjing. And there is no organic Longjing. It grows in such a small area that even if a farmer went organic, it wouldn't be, because his neighbor's spray would cover his fields. There is some organic Longjing grown elsewhere, but tea is its environment. It is its terroir. You can't have Wui Cliff tea grown somewhere else. It doesn't work. The tea is its environment. So it's not the same. It's like it's not, it has a little bit of the genetic juju, a little bit, but it's not fully there. So it doesn't have the real juju of the original, and so I don't really drink Longjing tea. And if there were organic Longjing tea, I would drink Longjing tea, all the time, every week. Maybe not year-round, but it would be a huge part of my life, and that's very sad to me. But I've made this commitment, and that commitment has done so much for me and unlocked so many doors in my life, and I don't regret it. I'm a little sad, but I'm not going to compromise out of some desire of my own, right? So, we're going to move on to a couple other maps that I want to give you today. One of the common maps that's put out there, which we're not going to talk about in this course, is, starting in the last 100 years, tea has begun to be classified originally as the 6 genres of tea, but now the tea world has changed, so it's much better to use 7, because the map of 7 genres fits the tea world as it is. Why we're not going to talk about that map? Because that map is based completely on the industrial relationship to tea. In other words, it is a map that is exclusively determined by the way that tea is processed. Almost. It is almost exclusively. You can adapt it, the map, you can crack it open because it has that problem. It doesn't mean it's not a useful map and that I hate it. Maps are just maps. It's better to have lots of maps. You can have road maps, political maps, weather maps, climatic maps, topographic maps, all kinds of maps. Use them all. I use that map. I teach it. I do courses called the 7 genres of tea. I think it's fine. And I know how to crack it open so you don't get lost in just focusing on processing. But let's just say it's a processing-centric map. In other words, it's a map based on the human part of tea. And it kind of ignores the nature part, which is suitable to the rational modern world and the industrialization and production of tea, to sit around and geek out about what humans do with this plant and ignore the plant itself and its environment. So that's why in this course it doesn't really have a place, that map. But I'm not saying don't use that map or throw it away. No, keep it. We're just not going to talk about it here. But I will mention them briefly, right? It's green tea, white tea, yellow tea, oolong, black and red. And the black and red is very important because in the West, these are confused, and we have to correct that. If you're going to travel in the tea world, you have to understand that what is called black tea in the West is not black tea. In fact, some stores in the West, you can see the Chinese characters, red tea, and then in English, black tea, which makes no sense, right? And this comes from, centuries of mistakes. And in the beginning, when tea first started coming to the West, Western people weren't really allowed into China, and they didn't see tea trees or processing. And they thought actually there was 2 types of tea, green and black, and they actually thought they were separate species. Later on, they figured out that no, it's Camellia sinensis, and it was more to do with how it was processed. But the oolong tea was called black tea in those days. It was just black and green were kind of how it was divided in the beginning in the West. But this is a mistake, and it's important because there is a whole other genre of tea called black tea, which is post-production fermented tea. So when I speak of black tea, I'm talking about, dark tea, fermented teas. And when I say red tea, I'm thinking of what in the supermarket is called black tea. That's important. So I'm going to use these names of these genres, but I'm not going to dive deeply into their processing in this course. We could do another course maybe on that. As I said, I'm not opposed to that map. One of the online courses we've thought about doing in the future is maybe a 7 genres of tea, if you guys give the thumbs up, and we could even maybe send a box with all the different types of tea and drink them together and talk about them and have a lesson for each of the 7 genres over a week like this. I'd be more than open to geeking out like that. I'm not, opposed to the rational approach to the world. I just think it's a map you can get stuck in and miss out on so much of what life is about. So I'm not going to use that map. I'm going to give you a couple other maps for exploring tea. The first one, I think it is very helpful if you're going to approach tea as plant medicine, if you're going to approach tea as spiritual practice, if you're going to approach tea as self-cultivation, if you're going to approach tea as ceremony. As plant medicine, yesterday I gave the analogy of the queen and having the etiquette of her court, which can smooth the dialogue with her. Even though the dialogue you have is personal, what you learn from tea is completely personal and up to you. But if you know the etiquette, you can communicate better. And so, tea grew up in China. And if you're going to approach tea as plant medicine, I think, even though I said earlier it wasn't born in Chinese culture, it was born in tribal culture. What is today nationally Chinese, but not culturally. That said, Chinese culture did rear tea. Didn't birth it, but it certainly reared it. And there's certainly a lot of the 10,000 baos have to be given to Chinese culture. Maybe even 8,500, or let's make it more even, 5,000. 5,000 baos for the tribal peoples who discovered tea and began its human journey, and 5,000 baos for the Chinese culture that raised it to adulthood. And because of that, if you're going to approach it as medicine, I think it's helpful to take at least a beginner's approach to traditional Chinese medicine and its relationship to tea, if not a deeper dive. You can take as deep a dive as you want. You can literally get a doctorate in it, right? Traditionally, by the way, there were doctors that worked exclusively with tea. They're called cha bo shi. Kind of what I am, right? I'm a restoration of that tradition. I'm a cha bo shi. And so, you could literally get a doctorate in these things. But a casual understanding, I think, is really relevant if you're going to approach tea as plant medicine, because now you're approaching it in its native language. And so I'm going to give you a real brief breakdown. And I will I am going to give you, in the course materials, I'm going to give you a little bit of a chart to help you a little bit. I have it here. And so I'll give this to you and it will help you, right? And it's very basic, but it's a launching point. It's a launching point into a deeper exploration, okay? So the launching point is, first to start out with is yin and yang. These are the masculine and feminine of the universe, the push and pull, the receptive and creative, and that you can dive really deep into that. But remember, this is just I'm just pushing you I'm just like giving your boat a little nudge. There's a lot of sailing left to do, and you can go as far as you want into this. Okay, so breaking this down very simply. As simple as I can. I'm trying to be sweeping, and unfortunately that's going to be a little bit reductionistic, but I'm also inviting you to explore, which isn't reductionistic. The older the tea tree, the more mature the leaves on the tree, and the older the tea itself is aged, the more yin it is. The older the tree is, the more mature the leaves are, the older the tea is, if it's aged, the more yin. The younger the tree, the fresher the leaves, and the fresher the tea, the more yang. So that's your introduction to yin and yang. And I'm really only having 2 concepts in this. We could have 7. We could do the 3 treasures we talked about in the previous discourse, the Jing, Qi, and Shen. I'm not going there. Just yin and yang to start, and then the 5 elements. There's 5 elements in Chinese. Now, it's important, I think, to first state that the 5 elements in Chinese are not substances, as they can be with the 4 elements in the West. They aren't meant to be, because the world in the West, in the more rational approach, is more treated like substance and mechanistic laws of substance, matter, in other words. But these aren't meant to be matter. They aren't what things are made of. You could view them that way, but that's not really part of the traditional worldview. The reason that the elements are used the way they are is because those substances best metaphorically represent the energy that's being discussed, right? So we have fire, earth, metal, water, wood. And so it's not, you can think of it literally fire, but it's not literally fire. Fire is just a metaphor for a way of energy working. And these 5 elements are rich. They stand for seasons, times of day, colors, flavors. This goes on and on and on and on. And each one has a yin and a yang, a yin fire and a yang fire. And so it can get very, very complicated. I'm just trying to give you a very simple introduction, okay, to them. But I would say don't approach them as substance, as stuff, but rather as metaphors for energy. That's a helpful thing. It was helpful for me, at least. And so when it comes to tea, there's a lot of exceptions. There's a lot of exceptions, but this will be on your chart that I'm going to give you. There's a lot of exceptions, but for the most part, right, and I'm going to give you some general maps, but really you have to approach each tea individually. There's a lot of exceptions. And so there's a lot of sums in this, right? Okay? But to start out with, I'm going to follow the order on your paper. It's not really the order in my mind, but I put it there like that. Metal is white tea, most especially Yunanese white teas, and some black teas. Remember, when I say black, I mean dark teas. I don't mean red. Some black teas. I won't say that again, but you have to keep that in mind. Some black teas. Huangpian. Huangpian are very mature leaves, usually from large leaf tea trees. Small leaf tea trees also have huangpian. Huangpian means yellow peas. It's called that because of oolong processing, and those big leaves were sorted out. But especially in Yunnan, the huangpian and some black teas in other regions is very metallic. And aged oolongs are very often metal. Water is green teas, yellow teas, lightly oxidized oolongs like baozhong. Wood is some black tea, stem tea, like our Leo An stem tea on our website, or woodcutter. Some shengpuer, especially a lot of middle-aged shengpuer, around 15, 20 years old, and some shoupuer. Fire is roasted oolong and red tea. And earth is some shoupuer, aged sheng, and some black tea. So that's a basic map, and I'm going to give you this chart. That's a basic map of the teas in their elements. Again, there are exceptions, but there it is. Now, in order to begin applying this, again, application isn't theory. To begin applying this, you just need a couple tools to start this journey in your life. And those tools are, the first one is to understand that each element represents a season, right? So wood is spring. You could think things grow, right? And then fire is early summer, and then earth is late summer, and metal is autumn, right? And water is winter. So if you know that, that's the first thing you need to start applying this alchemy. And then the second thing you need to start applying this alchemy is to understand that these elements have two basic cycles, the sheng and the ke. So you can think of them as nourishing and controlling, right? So the sheng cycle nourishes, and the ke cycle disciplines, you could say, controls, holds, reserves, whatever. The easiest analogy for me, even though it's completely contrary to my upbringing and my entire worldview, is that in traditional Chinese society, actually, it's kind of backwards to America in modern times, and probably most of you, which is that in traditional households in China a long time ago, the mother was the really gentle, kind one, and the grandmother was the one that held the stick and disciplined everybody. It's hard for me to imagine, because my mom was the force of discipline, and my grandma was the sweetest thing heaven ever made. She taught me unconditional love. She's the source of it in my life. She, the love she empowered in me. Of course, my mother's discipline was also a kind of love, right? And so with these elements, you can also think of, when it comes to the discipline of the grandmother, there could be over-discipline. You don't want to over-discipline, and you want to, the right amount of discipline. But anyway, if you look at the chart, right, and you see the sheng cycles going around, so you can think of it even like, wood grows and then it's burned in fire, and it becomes ash, which is earth, and the earth makes metal, the metal dissolves into the water, and the water makes the tree grow. You have this sheng cycle. And the ke is the grandmother, right? So the grandmother of metal is fire, so fire disciplines metal. Yeah? And metal's the grandmother of wood, so the axe cuts the tree, etc., etc. So when you have these two cycles and you have the seasons, and then I guess there's 3 tools you need to start applying this. Sorry, I said 2. The third one is to understand that these things are either in excess or deficient. So they're stagnating, in which case they need to be controlled, or they're deficient, in which case they need to be nourished. Right? So then you can start to map this. You can start, it's a journey into this, you see? It's a journey into this world of alchemy, because if you have like you have a wood tea. Wood is spring. So it's the springtime. And if it's growth, right? And these are also emotions, and all kinds of things are related to this. Organs in the body, so much. And so if the wood is, this language is very rich and dense and applicable. This is why it's so powerful and helpful. And T grew up in it, you see? So it's springtime, yeah? And you need to, the wood is growing too much. You need to control it. You would use metal teas, white teas, some black teas, huang pian, right? Or you want to nourish it, the springtime. Then you would use water teas, green tea, yellow tea, lightly oxidized oolongs. Do you see? This is how this works. So, it's autumn time, right? You can, and that's the metal. You can nourish the metal with earth, with shou pu'er, age pu'er, in the late summer, early autumn, that time, right? And you can control it with fire, which is the roasted oolongs and red teas. So this starts to give you a seasonal map. You can also start to apply this even to times of day, whether you're drinking tea in the mornings, and on and on this goes. But I encourage you to explore this map. Really explore it. I'm going to give you this chart so you can get started. These concepts are deep and powerful, and they're the language that T grew up in, so it's really worth exploring. I'm going to give you with a few maps today. Another map I would like to give you is quality, the quality map. what makes quality in tea. And the more we get sensitive to that, that's really important. There are 7 things that create the quality of tea. These 7 things, they make tea. To make fine tea, you need heaven, earth, and human. Right? So 7 things that make the quality of tea. First of all, the quality of tea is the region, the mountain itself. The place. That's why I told you can't grow Wui Cliff tea outside of Wui. The place is the tea. And that includes things we can measure, like the altitude, the soil, etc. And also things that are more spiritual, like feng shui and the geomancy. The relationship to the stars. For hundreds of years, Wui Cliff tea, for example, is right under the Big Dipper. And actually, there is evidence that plants, this is something we don't often think about, that plants can photosynthesize moon and starlight at a much, much smaller degree. There is some evidence. I don't know that it's proven, but it's possible. They're certainly taking in the energy of those stars. And so related to the stars they grow under, related to so many things of the place where it grows. So the region is the first aspect of its quality. The second is the environment, the biodiversity, the soil quality, the water that is there. You know, this is closely related to the first one, obviously. But when you first start learning about the quality of tea, you need to learn to taste the regions. You need to know what Iu Pu'er tastes like as opposed to, Laobanzang Pu'er. What, Li Shan Oolong tastes like versus Ali Shan Oolong. You can even, this location can even go down to into the second one, like different kungs in the park of Wui. Kung is like a grotto. It's a cliff tea grows in grottos. So Dao Shui Kung or Niulan Kung, those are 2 different environments, both within Wui. So the environment means like the biodiversity, the garden, all those things, that affects the quality. The quality of tea is also the health of the tea trees. Are they a varietal or a cultivar? Varietal is a natural varietal, we could say. Well, actually, cultivars are varietals. So I should separate them by saying natural varietal versus cultivar, because it's a little confusing. Cultivars are types of varietal. Cultivar is a man-made varietal. So let's distinguish them by saying, is it a natural varietal or a man-made varietal? How old are the trees? Are they healthy? Were they seed propagated? How often are they picked? Right? The health of the trees and what type of trees is very much related to the quality of the tea. Next is the weather of that particular year. Every time you drink tea, you're drinking the weather. If you talk with tea producers, like master tea producers in Wui, for example, I'm continuing to use that place as an example, they will tell you a lot like wine, a lot like they'll tell you on vineyards, right? Which is that really, it's like once every 7 years or once every 10 years that you get the perfect wine. Why? Because the weather is there. These 3, the first 3, these are the earth, the region, the garden, so the region, the mountain, its feng shui, its altitude, all those things, the specific garden itself and all of its biodiversity, the health of the trees, that's the earth part. The heaven part's the weather. The weather has to be just right to make the perfect tea at just the right time. And that doesn't happen every year. You can't force that. There's nothing you can do. You just got to make the best tea you can with what you have. And that brings us to 5, which is the human, the processing skills. The skills of the human to dry the tea is very much a part of the quality. In some teas, it's half the quality. So you can have the right weather and you can have the right environment, the right earth, but if the human lacks the skill to process it, you're still not going to have nice tea. Then 6 is the storage of the tea. Whether it's stored for a day or 20 years, the storage is still relevant. The longer it's stored, the more storage becomes relevant. That's all. The degree that storage impacts the quality of the tea is dependent upon how long the tea is stored. And this has to do with also material things and spiritual things. It could be the container it's in, the humidity, the oxygen, depending on the tea, and even the energy, the environment is it stored in a place where people are shouting at each other? Is it treated like commodity, or is it held in reverence? And then, of course, the seventh aspect of the quality of tea is the way that it's prepared. And this also has physical and mental sides. The water that is used primarily, the type of fire that is used, charcoal, electric heat, all the different types of fire. The teaware, the quality of the teaware, the brewing method, and the heart. We talked about this yesterday. The most important element is the heart and the heart mind of the one brewing. All of those things impact the tea. And as you develop in your tea journey, you will, if you develop and cultivate your sensitivity, which I suggest, you will be able to determine which of these is impacting the quality of the tea. Absolutely. It is possible to be able to become sensitive, not perfect, but to become sensitive. First of all, maybe the easiest one is the regions. To know the regions. Maybe the brewing, I don't know. Different for different people. Some of them are stronger, I guess. The brewing maybe, and mistakes in that, or the region. These are maybe the end and the beginning are kind of maybe the easiest one. But you can reach a place where you know that the mistake is in the processing, or the mistake is in the etc. And different types of teas lean on these things differently, right? In oolong, half the quality is in the heaven and earth, the weather and the trees, and half in the processing. Pu'er, on the other hand, is 90-10. It's not a lot of processing skill. It's a lot more to do with the mountain and the garden and the trees and the weather. Right? Which is why when you give a pu'er tea to a cliff tea master, because they can taste the processing mistakes. So you'll begin to taste these things. And one of the most eye-opening experiences for me early in my tea journey in the early 2000s, one of the most important teachers in my life is a master here in Taiwan named Zhou Yu, and a dear brother and a very important teacher in my life. And I made several trips to Yunnan with him, and on one of them, he was trying to create a blend of tea, and he literally had all these factory workers at this tea factory were blown away. Almost all the factory stopped their work and came. They started to crowd around until he said please, and then the bosses got rid of everybody, because they were putting out teas they were putting out 20, 30 teas, and he went and meditated. Of course, you have to quiet your mind, be more sensitive, and he was just smelling these teas and tasting them from cups, and they were all just marked 1, 2, 3, 4, just numbers. And he was literally just saying which mountain it was from and what the weather was like, and just really subtle aspects of this. And if you think that's just the quality of experience, you're also wrong, because I have been blown away. I have gone traveling all around this world. I've certainly had the experience where I share a tea with somebody and they have almost zero experience with tea. And something I used to do a lot, I don't do it so much anymore, but I used to just drink a tea in silence for an hour and then go around and share and let people share what their experience was. And I've had experiences where, one in particular, I remember this woman. She was an elder and very wise, and she had been dancing her whole life, so she was also a master in her own right and very sensitive. And she just said, when I drank this tea, I saw a place. And she started describing a place that was a photograph of the place that tea was grown in. I'm talking rocks in certain places, what the trees look like. It was just unbelievable that she was able to drink it. And I verified that not just through others, but through myself, because I told you I've traveled to these tea mountains. And if you've traveled to tea mountains, you know, like me, that when you drink that tea, it can very easily, that's one of the magics of tea. It brings nature to society, it brings the mountain to the city. So often, if you've ever traveled on a global tea trip, or you've traveled to tea mountains, you know when you drink that tea, you can be transported there. Why? Because that tea carries the juju of that place. The leaf is the expression of the tree's relationship to its environment. It is its environment. It is its terroir. We use this French word, terroir, right, which means soil, climate, the processing method, the human culture, all the weather, all that stuff together. So, you can get sensitive to these things. You can learn to distinguish the problem of the weather versus the processing, etc. Not perfectly. Nobody's perfect. One of the places I would suggest you start in trying to determine the quality of tea is to start trying to taste agrochemicals. Start trying to taste the inorganics, because there's a lot of, because as I said at the beginning of this conversation, that's the most important element. I don't care how you approach tea. We have to start demanding sustainable teas. And when vendors start saying, but, I say, I love you, brother. And if you prepare this tea for me, I'm going to enjoy it. We'll talk about that tomorrow. I'm not going to judge you because you're serving me inorganic tea, but I'm not going to buy it. No matter what spiel you give me about why it's okay to harm my Mother Earth and the farmers that produce tea and my own body, I don't accept that. And I think it's ignorance. I think it's wrong view. It's misled. And also, let me tell you, really, bottom line. It's always bottom line. It's not a spiel. It's not a spiel. It's just that they couldn't find an organic version of that tea at the price that they need to meet their margins. That's it, full stop. And the quality price was a better offering in the conventional version. I also find it curious that we have to call this modern blip of agriculture, 10,000 years of agriculture, and 99% of that are done organically, and yet the inorganic is the conventional, and the 99% is the unconventional. It should very much be the opposite. What we're doing is unconventional. So learn to taste agrochemicals. You will never be perfect at this. Only a lab can 100% determine if there are agrochemicals in tea. And beware scare tactics also in the tea market. I don't think scare tactics are usually done intentionally, but they can be there. And a scare tactic is an old marketing technique. It goes back all the way to like camels and caravans. It's basically like you go into the photography market, and there's 8,000 photography shops there, and you go up to Janus's, and let's say in this case he's a little bit crafty and sketchy, and so he pulls out a fake lens, and he says to you, look, this is a fake lens. There's a lot of fake lenses in this market, beware. Now that does two things. First of all, it makes you scared that there's lots of fake lenses, and second of all, it makes you want to trust him because he's the one that told you. And so my point is that I don't think it's conscious. It's usually good intention. These are good people. They wouldn't be selling organic teas if they weren't, but there can be this like, there's lots of inorganic teas, beware. And I'm the source of the clean tea. I'm the instrument of it. And no human is. You can't taste perfectly, right? Only a lab can be certain. That doesn't mean the quest to learn to try to taste chemicals isn't valuable. It is incredibly valuable, even if it isn't foolproof. First of all, it will increase your ability to listen to tea. You'll be becoming more sensitive, listening deeper, right? Second of all, it will increase your sensitivity across the board throughout your life. Your relationship to food, to all kinds of things will shift. And third, most importantly, you will be cultivating environmental awareness in your life and in the lives of people around you. You will be beginning a very important conversation that needs to be had over and over again, more important than any other conversation right now. I know there's a lot of important conversations out there. Certainly, political conversations. There are racial conversations going on. There are gender conversations. All those conversations are wonderful and beautiful and need to be had. Not a drop of dismiss, only love for conversation and growth. However, the ultimate conversation is the environment, because if the environment is destroyed to the point that all humans go extinct, all those other conversations don't matter. And so this conversation is the most important conversation. What we're doing to the earth is what we're doing to our future, ourselves, our health, everything. Yeah. So that's the most important in trying to taste agrochemicals. You're also bringing that awareness more into your tea and more into your life. And so that's why it's worthwhile. And you don't, instead of approach of like, I am the measure of clean tea, because especially in the beginning when you're not able to separate those 7 qualities, when a tea makes you uncomfortable in some way, it could be because, back to the alchemy, it could be the wrong time of year, the wrong time of day, the wrong element, the wrong tea. It could be over-disciplining, or it could be undernourishing, or whatever, right? It could be the wrong tea. Or it could have quality problems, just not in the area that you think. You think it has agrochemicals, but actually it just has bad storage. And you're not able to tell the difference between the two. But that's okay. You're at least becoming sensitive and you're realizing, hey, this tea is not for me. At least not now. Maybe try it again a little bit later. Maybe it will be, but that's enough. It's enough to just know this isn't for me, not now. And so you'll be increasing your sensitivity. And of course, this, in order to increase your sensitivity, you will have to meet the tea. So you will have to increase your sensitivity, which then will impact your life. Because if you want to be more sensitive to tea on a spiritual level and in terms of determining its quality, right? You're going to have to pay more attention to your diet, your sleep routines, your meditation, how much thoughts are in your mind. Because even if you want to just become sensitive to tea in the sense of like a hobby, you want to know what quality is in tea and be able to determine quality with your own mouth as the gauge. You want to know more about tea through tasting it, right? You have to quiet down. I told you, Joe, you meditated before you drank those teas. You got to be quiet. That's why he sent away those factory workers that were starting to ogle him. You have to start being more sensitive to your diet, right? My teacher always said it's not that eating at McDonald's makes you insensitive, it's that you have to be insensitive to eat at McDonald's. To eat junk food, you have to be not listening to your body first. It's not that the eating of it makes you not listen to your body. You see, if you're listening to your body, it's not, you get to a place where it's not that I want to eat junk food, but I don't because I'm disciplining myself with a whip. We talked about discipline yesterday. Discipline comes from within, it's self-love. I have no desire to eat junk food. It doesn't make me feel nice. And because I'm in tune with my body, I don't feel nice. And then I don't feel nice. Why do I want to not feel nice? You see, this is one of the ways that tea is inviting us, inspiring us to be better people. If you want to get more from tea, the more you show up listening, ready, sensitive. Listening is just a metaphor. I keep using this word throughout this course, but it's just a metaphor. The more receptive you are, the more you experience. Isn't that obvious? Joey was able to experience the weather and the mountain and all those things when he drank the tea because he's more open. And he has some experience, obviously, some training. We talked about training too, right? He's not just a beginner, like a child doing the chaotic dance. There's a very real difference between setting someone without any training free and they do a chaotic dance and setting someone with training free and what they can do with that freedom. So he's trained, but he's also free. He has to free his mind. He has to be sensitive. And so you have to start paying attention to diet, sleep, exercise, meditation, mental health, all of these things if you want to be sensitive to tea more. And if you want to be, and being more sensitive to tea means you experience more. And experience more means you're rewarded more, both in terms of medicine and healing and spiritual growth, and also in terms of you taste more flavors, you smell more aromas, you get more enjoyment from tea, the more you experience of it, obviously. It's like hi-fi speakers. The better they are, the more they give you from the music. So if you listen to a crummy little Bluetooth speaker, you can still enjoy music, but you get more out of it when you play it through better instruments. So, it inspires you to want to show up and be there for the tea. And as you do that, you'll be able to separate where the quality is. But in the beginning, it's enough to know it's not for you. Now, one of the best tea lessons I've ever learned in terms of practical tea lessons, so universal, so powerful. And it can be a life lesson too, actually. You can take this to the bank, right? But in tea, it has been quintessential in everything that I've done. And my teacher gave it to me. And it's basically this. There is yes and there is no, and all maybes are no. So long as you follow that, you'll never go astray. And that's to do with teaware, anything. When I sit and drink a tea, it's yes or it's no, and all maybes are no. If a tea is a maybe, I don't buy it. If somebody's selling an antique cup or an antique pot, I know it's real or I know it's fake. If I'm not sure, I don't buy it. Even if it's cheap. You know why? If it's cheap, it might, you could argue, and I maybe would understand your argument that, well, if it's cheap, it doesn't really matter. And if I find out it's fake later, it was still a good investment because I learned something. I get that. Drinking some crummy tea is kind of essential so that you can, learn. Let's also, 98% of what is crummy in tea is because of what humans have done. When you leave tea alone, it tends to be great. 98% of crummy tea is because of what humans have done to her. Either they lack the processing skill to process the tea properly, or because they don't care, because they're making commodity and beverage, not quality, right? So they lack the processing skill, or they just use poor agricultural methods or put chemicals on it or whatever. So that's mostly, it. But, drinking some crummy tea to learn, I get it. But the problem is, if you say yes to maybes, they can skew your whole journey because they form the basis of what becomes your future yes and no. So if I buy a teapot that's maybe real, it might influence me psychologically, and I might start using it as part of my standard to determine what yes and no is. In other words, start thinking that real pots look like this. And now I'm off to the races down a path of fake teapots. Do you see? So it's influencing my future buying decisions. If somebody says, hey, this is EUT, and I'm not sure, and I get it, and it isn't, I might start thinking EUT tastes like this, and then I'm off to the races wrong. This is where also it's so helpful to have a personal relationship with a teacher, not an internet online course like this. You can't regard me in this way through a camera. Most of you. Some of you, we already have this kind of personal relationship, but a lineage has good memory and has, and there's trust and love, and so you can, find maybe other trusted sources or have a personal relationship with a teacher. You shouldn't do that through this camera with me even. I more rely on your own experience. Don't trust me, right? In terms of this tea is this or this pot is this or, those things. You got to learn to taste yourself. So it's better all maybes are no. And what happens is as you grow, your maybes get smaller. When I first started, I was only sure of in terms of I Ching pots, I was only sure about 5%. 5% of cases I can tell yes or no. And mostly because my teacher gave me a real pot, my first pot. So I had a good standard to start out with. And when I was going out pot shopping, I literally would take it with me and pull it out in shops like a doofus, like a geek. And if, and still I was maybe. Almost all the time. I was only sure that it was either real or not in 5% of cases. And then over time, over decades, touching tens of thousands of pots, the maybes have gone down. I don't know what percentage it's at now, but it's down, very low. And so that's a really good practice. In terms of the quality of tea, there's a lot you can focus on. We have the 10 qualities of tea. We gave you them as a supplementary material in the other day. Certainly study those. We have a video about them as well. Let's put the video in today's supplementary. We put the PDF version of the 10 qualities of fine tea in a couple days ago in the course material. Today in our supplementary material, we will also include the video version, so you can go watch that. So that's a good place to start. Another really important place to start is to, the character for evaluating tea in Chinese is ping. Ping is 3 mouths. The character is 3 mouths. And the 3 mouths are, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. And this is how we evaluate tea. The eye part, it's hard for me to teach right now because we'd have to be sitting together and I'd have to have lots of tea around and we could use the eyes. The eyes are a part of it, the way that the tea looks, and we can maybe go learn that in a later date. So, but I will give you some tips in terms of the aroma and the flavor. The first, most important, I think, tip is to start to, in terms of evaluating tea, not in terms of appreciating tea, but in terms of evaluating tea, move away from flavor and aroma when it comes to mouth and nose. In other words, start moving away from it tastes like, it smells like, and I like that or don't like that. Because that measure is too subjective, too loose, too useless in terms of evaluation. When you say, this tea tastes like whatever, this tea tastes like a flower, this tea tastes like orchids. It doesn't taste like orchids to someone that's never smelled an orchid. I guess it would smell like orchids. You want a good example of that? There's a black tea called Liupao. Wonderful tea. Liupao means 6 castles. It's a place in Guangxi, and there was probably 6 castles, but Chinese castles were often made of wood, so there's no ruins of them left, but the place is still called 6 castles. The tea is called Liupao because it's from Liupao. And famously, for centuries, Chinese, especially Guangdong people, Guangxi people, Hong Kong people, they have said that Liupao tea tastes like betel nut flowers. Now, betel nut flowers are a dish that you eat. It's a flower from the betel nut tree. They're actually wonderful. I love that dish. It's one of my favorite dishes. It's also a delicacy of the ethnicity that is local here in Miaoli, where we live, the Hakka people. The Hakka people love to eat betel nut flowers. And I love to eat betel nut flowers too. So, you know, for a long, long time, people have said, Liupao tea tastes like betel nut flowers. Now, if you're watching this from New York, if you're watching this from LA, and I say to you, Liupao tastes like betel nut flowers, you're just like, what? Most people, most Americans had never, you know, and I hadn't either until I moved here, had never even seen a betel nut flower, let alone tasted one. So of course Liupao tea doesn't taste like betel nut flowers to someone that's never tasted it. You understand? It tastes like is your memory putting two things together. It's not real. Not fully. And then worse is the way that you evaluate it. In other words, it tastes like betel nut flowers. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? And that will depend a lot on memory too. You like chocolate, I like strawberry. That might have to do with the memory of my grandmother giving me strawberry ice cream and yours giving you chocolate. It's really the positives or negatives of what something tastes or smells like is very much based on memory and our taste buds and all kinds of things that are highly subjective and difficult to pin down. And so where do we move? We move to sensation in both aroma and in flavor in the mouth. Learn to add dimension to your tea. As you increase in sensitivity, you are adding dimension. For some time, that might mean that when you're trying to evaluate tea, not when you're trying to appreciate it. When you're trying to appreciate it, let go. Let it be flavor, aroma, let it be everything. But when you're trying to evaluate it, you might have to ignore the flavor and aroma to try to focus on the sensation. But after time, when you get good at sensing the sensation, you can let the flavor and aroma back in. And now you've added dimension to your tea experience through sensitivity. You've been rewarded. What you experience in tea is more, right? So flavor and aroma is like the physical attraction when we first meet someone we're interested in. Wow, he's handsome. Wow, she's pretty. But then you go deeper. You learn, you get to know them. There's many dimensions beyond that, right? And those dimensions are more important. They're inner. It goes all the way to energy and spirit. Okay? So, you know, and the best analogy I have for this is clothes. If we took 100 people that were a random slice of a society, different ages and genders and backgrounds, and we asked them to evaluate 10 different outfits based on appearance, there would be no concordance. And worse, whatever concordance we had would be coincidental. In other words, they would all disagree, and whatever agreement we did have, even if we did have 20 people that chose the same purple dress, if we had them write down the reason why, you would see that that was just a coincidence. There's no causality. They were choosing the purple dress for all kinds of reasons. One, because it's their favorite color. Another, because it had lilies on it, and their grandmother used to always have lilies, and they love lilies. There's no concordance. But if we repeat the experiment and we blindfold all those people and they feel those outfits, then we'll have a lot of concordance. It won't matter that there's an ugly watermelon dress and a pretty purple dress if the watermelon dress is made of synthetic polyester and this is made of, we all know, right? We might sacrifice comfort for fashion. We all do that. But then when we get home, we slip into something more comfortable, which is fibers that breathe and are natural, like linen and cotton and silk, etc. So you'll have a lot more agreement, and you'll have a lot more causality because the agreement will be for the same reason. It's smooth, it's soft, it's comfortable, etc. So we want to get to that place with the way that the tea is interacting with our body too. And so in terms of smell, there's two things you can focus on, right? So again, away from, take the leaves, these leaves, right? The leaves, you can start with the leaves, and away from what it smells like and whether you like that smell or not. Away from this smells like peaches and I like that or I don't. Away from that, right? To the sensation of the air. And there's two aspects. First of all, when I calm down, this is sensitive. You have to, again, and the more you show up, the more meditation, the more better diet, the more exercise, sleep, all the things that make a person less worry, stuff you have on your mind, the better you'll be able to do this. But the first aspect of the sensation is to notice if it causes any discomfort literally in your nasal cavity, scratchiness, roughness, any kind of discomfort, or is it smooth? The second, more subtler and yet still deeper and more powerful aspect of the sensation of the smell is how deep you can take the air in. The finest teas actually will go all the way to your dantian effortlessly. They'll just, right? And you will learn to become sensitive to the fact that if you close your eyes and you go slow, breathe slow, inhale slow, be sensitive. And if you start to inhale, you'll notice that a lot of teas start to pinch. They reach a certain point, and then in order to get the air back further, you have to suck. You have to use will. You have to struggle to get the air to go down, right? This is good tea, so it goes pretty far. But it also reaches a point, this tea, where it doesn't go all the way. Yeah? So does the air flow all the way down on its own? And sometimes it feels like it's like challenging us in the sense that like it goes, if we only had bigger lungs, it would go further. Right? So it'll just go some for the finest teas, right? So that's the sensation of breath. As far as the sensation of the mouth, there's a lot. They're in the 10 qualities of a fine tea, right? Particular one is the smoothness of the tea. Does it stay together or separate? Does it splash to the upper palate, right? Does it go back on its own? Does it go down on its own, just like the air, right? And a very powerful one for agrochemicals is the pinch in the throat. Pinch in the throat, huh? And do you have to swallow it and it leaves a pinch, or does it lubricate your throat and open your throat? Does it leave your mouth dry, or does it leave your mouth coated and wet? These are all useful tools for finding good tea and also for finding agrochemicals. And then agrochemicals actually are, also they will sometimes create other discomforts in the body elsewhere around. They could make weird things. For me, I feel them very often in my temples. Some people feel them other places. For me, it's the temple. Very often the temple. You might feel somewhere else some discomfort, and that might not be again due to agrochemicals. That could be storage or other problems. But for now, it's enough for you to know this tea's not for me. Not at least right now, right? So that's there. Also, the best thing to learn to start to taste agrochemicals is taste lots of clean tea. The more you drink a lot of really good sustainable tea, then the more you'll notice those frequencies that are off. That goes for any of the qualities, whether it be region. The more you drink genuine cliff tea from within the park, the more you'll be able to taste tea that's not. The more that you drink tea that was produced in the right weather, the more you'll be able to know tea that wasn't. The more that you taste tea that was processed well, the more you'll know tea that wasn't. The more that you taste tea that was prepared well or stored well, the more you'll know tea that isn't, right? So you start tasting good versions more and more and more, and some not as good. And then you start, the more tea you drink, if you're sensitive, you will be able to start to taste these qualities. So get some clean tea. I'm very excited to announce something. It's not ready yet. It'll probably be next month, but we are releasing actually a taste kit. We had 2 teas in Taiwan, actually from 2 different farms, a completely clean organic farm and an inorganic one. We had the inorganic tea, and they're very close to each other, so nearby in region, same type of tea. And we had the inorganic one even brought to the organic farmer to process, so they would both be processed by the same hands. And we're going to be releasing a set that comes with both of these teas and a magazine, a full magazine with all the information I just gave you, plus a bunch more information. So you'll be able to have a guide to tasting them. And it will start out blind, so they'll just be labeled A and B, and you can taste them blind and then have the results later. And if you want, for a little bit more, we're going to also, if you want, you can include some tasting sets, which will be explained in the set. And so this kit will be available probably next month. It's been a long time in the works. We've been working on it for a long, long time, and it's finally coming ready to fruition. So when that does come out, I would recommend that. But drinking lots of clean tea, being a member of Global Tea, we strive really hard to provide 12 sustainable teas a year, right? Or 36 if you're in the higher tier subscriptions and get 3 teas each month. So that's a really good way also to get some clean teas every month and start tasting lots of clean tea. So today we're going to give you lots of homework. I'm going to give you a chart for the elements for exploring the alchemy of tea. We have some really great homework, right? What does health look like to me? What does being healthy look like to me? Why is tea important to me? Number 3, can land and natural resources be owned, bought, and sold? What parts of nature do I commoditize, and what can I do about it? Some exercises. Start studying the alchemy of tea and contemplate the ways you can apply this to your tea practice in life. Begin tasting for chemicals in tea. Try listening more, studying the 10 qualities of a fine tea, and making an effort to generate and spread more environmental awareness in the tea world and in the world in general. Continue with the 3rd meditation instructions that we gave you, 1 hour in the morning and evening. Continue to drink tea, hold the bowl properly, listen to nature, continue to practice side handle tea ceremony, and continue to practice chashi. In the heaven discussion, we can discuss all things tea as plant medicine, and in the earth, we can discuss all things in tea in practical terms. And the slogan for today is, medicine is anything that puts us in harmony with spirit and life on earth. And I would like to, since we spent this whole day talking about tea, I would like to, in typical Zen fashion, with a rascally glimmer in my eyes, erase it all with one of the most powerful and important tea quotes from one of the constellations in the sky of Zen and tea, one of the greatest Zen and tea masters that ever lived, Sen no Rikyo. He said this, and I invite you to think about it. Imagine your life without tea, and if it's any different, you have yet to understand tea.